You're listening to a Tax Justice Network podcast covering the 10 worst global offenders identified by the Financial Secrecy Index in 2018. In third place is the Cayman Islands, a British overseas territory with a high secrecy score of 72.28 out of 100 and close to 4% of the global market. I'm Naomi Fowler, talking to tax justice campaigner Anthea Lawson. The Cayman Islands is third in the 2018 Financial Secrecy Index, after being fifth last time. What are the indicators telling us this time round? What are the major changes of note? Because the Cayman Islands were actually improving a little bit back in 2015. But what's happened to increase their secrecy score?
Right, so when they were fifth last time, they'd improved slightly from being fourth the time before and second the time before that. And they had been improving because they'd embraced some of the new transparency standards which have been emerging internationally from the OECD. But this time, their secrecy score has gone up by 11%, even though their share of the global market, which it gets weighted against, has decreased somewhat. So that increase in the secrecy score is really about the change in the methodology in the Financial Secrecy Index this time round, because Cayman has failed in most of the new indicators which have been added this time. So a couple of examples of that. Instead of just measuring transparency over ownership of companies and trusts, like the previous indexes, this one also looks at transparency on ownership of other assets, like real estate and goodies kept in free ports, which are giant super secure warehouses for the wealthy to keep their art and other valuables in tax-free. So the real estate register in the Caymans is not open to the public, and they do have free ports, and there's no evidence that they require registration of either the legal or the ultimate owners of the assets stored in them. Another thing, there's no registration of the legal or ultimate ownership of limited partnerships. That's a very big loophole. They offer citizenship by investment. That means you can pay, if you can afford it, and you have to pay quite a lot, to become a citizen. And once you're a citizen, that means that even if you have assets elsewhere in countries that are enthusiastic about sharing tax information under the new standards, the information on your earnings will be sent to your country of citizenship. That's to the Caymans, where it's unlikely that a lot is going to be done with it. Another new indicator is looking at openness of tax court proceedings. There's no open access to that, and they're not publishing the judgments.
Right, so quite a few problems there. And although if we look at the advances in multilateral information exchange on an automatic basis, the OECD's Common Reporting Standard, it was one of the first 20 jurisdictions to sign up to that, and that starts from this year, 2018. So hooray for them. But then there's a big but, that information is only going to be exchanged with selected jurisdictions. This is what a lot of the offenders of the top 10, you find this same kind of behaviour, and they're making agreements very selectively with jurisdictions where I guess they have the least business.
Yeah, this is a systemic problem, and the fact that it's appearing time after time in the top 10 shows that it's a systemic problem, and that's what happens if you leave a loophole. This OECD Common Reporting Standard for the exchange of tax information has a loophole, which is that countries can choose who they're sharing with. And guess what? All of the secrecy jurisdictions are using that loophole. So they get brownie points publicly on the international stage for signing up to the system. But you're choosing who you exchange the tax information with, a bit like a dating site for tax. And what that means is if they're choosing to exchange with rich countries, if they're choosing to exchange with countries where they're not doing a lot of business, then there's an enormous amount of information about the business they're doing elsewhere that is not going to be shared. And if they're not signing agreements with poorer countries, which Cayman's not, then those are the countries that are arguably most in need of their tax revenues, most in need of the help in tracking them down. But as I said, this is not just a problem with the Caymans.
Yes, indeed, unfortunately. And when it comes to a register of the real owners of companies that it has in its jurisdiction, it did very reluctantly pass a law under lots of international pressure in February 2017, creating a central register. So that was a sort of step forward, I guess, but it has resisted with all its might the British government's super polite requests for them to set up a public register.
Yes, that's right. Cayman is just not up for doing this. Setting up companies whose owner is hidden is vital to a secrecy jurisdiction's business. And according to press reports, the Cayman's Premier was quite clear that creating this central registry, albeit a still private one, was a way of avoiding the public registry option. And without it being public, not a lot changes in practice. If another country wants to find out who's behind a company, they still need to go through official routes to request the information, and that means they need to know what they're looking for. That is just not enough of a deterrent to people wanting to use offshore companies to move dirty or tax-evading money about. The only real deterrent is if the information is available publicly. And let's just talk for a moment about those polite requests from the UK. The UK has not been prepared to use its powers to force its overseas territories to do this. The UK-linked secrecy jurisdictions are just too important in funneling money towards the City of London. They did ask, yes, because there was some pressure to do so, but there's been a lot of counter-lobbying, and some high-level strings have been pulled every time the subject has come up in Whitehall. A lot of cloudy rhetoric comes from the UK about how it hasn't got the power to make this happen. But the fact is, it can, and it's choosing not to.
Right, and you could argue that the British sort of much improved position in this year's Financial Secrecy Index can very much be ascribed to the fact that a lot of the dirty business is being done in some of these jurisdictions. It's satellite havens.
Right, that's the great irony of this. The UK has actually done something really good. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, was one of the first to say, OK, we need to have transparency over company ownership, and it is now law in the UK. That is a fantastic achievement, and it shouldn't be underestimated. But there's something missing, and it's getting the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies to do it.
Right, so all eyes on the UK to do its job and bring them into line with the international standards. Let's talk about secrecy laws in the Cayman Islands. It has removed the criminal sanctions from its secrecy law, but whistleblowers can still be sued privately. There was an incident not so long ago with the Cayman's Compass publisher who had spoken about the corruption with FIFA, the football corruption, which famously involved the Cayman Islands, and felt the need to escape the country for some time. I'm not sure where he is right now, but that demonstrates the kind of pressure that there is still in this jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's right. So the previous secrecy law there was really quite extreme. It had prison terms not only for handing over information to unauthorised parties, but merely for asking for it. So this law was repealed in 2016, and under the new one, as you say, breaching confidentiality is no longer a criminal offence, though somebody can still sue if they want to. And the new law even offers some protection for whistleblowers, provided they act in good faith and have evidence either of wrongdoing or a serious threat to life, health or safety or to the environment. It remains to be seen how this is going to be interpreted in practice. But it also remains to be seen whether this alters the environment and the tone of the public debate. The previous year, when the publisher of the Cayman's Compass criticised corruption relating to FIFA, the Premier of the island called it treasonous. And yeah, as you say, he's had to flee the island. That kind of atmosphere is a very big part of the problem in small island secrecy jurisdictions, in constraining people from speaking out. And that doesn't seem to have changed, obviously.
Absolutely. And shadow banking with the Cayman Islands is particularly a big concern. The Financial Secrecy Index researchers have pointed out that there are really major risks associated with the sort of off-balance sheet behaviour of the US banks, which seem to be building up once again in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, that's right. So the new transparency initiatives which have emerged from the OECD tackle some of the problem of offshore, if they're done properly. So the tax information exchange arrangements are useful for seeing what individuals are up to and sharing information on that. The country-by-country reporting requirements are starting to offer some daylight into how multinational companies are shifting their profits around, which is a huge part of the offshore problem. But what they've not tackled is the off-balance sheet possibilities which offshore secrecy offers to banks. 3 years ago, Reuters reported that just 6 American banks were holding, at that point, $3.3 trillion of securitized loans in off-balance sheet entities in Cayman. So this is stuff that doesn't show up, and this is the stuff that allowed the last crash to happen. And so that sort of thing indicates that the secrecy offered by Cayman may be allowing those risks to build up again, and that's causing great concern to some people.